Hello, it's Doug from Behind Closed Doors, and today I'm going to be looking at a video called Why Do We Treat Male and Female Victims Differently? Let's have a look at the video.
This morning I was really angry because I felt like in the men's rights community, we believe and we rally behind almost every man who comes forward in Hollywood against any YouTube
Who is we?
star, TikTokers, whatever. But when it comes to women who come forward in Hollywood against politicians, against TikTokers, YouTubers, we never give them the same understanding. We automatically assume they're lying.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think the Me Too campaign has been hugely successful, and the men that have been named and shamed on that and such have suffered consequences of their actions. And so I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't automatically assume people are lying. I think the problem is that men and women express aggression differently. So men are going to be more violent and women are going to use reputation destruction. So women can very easily lie about a violent act, for example, whether it did or didn't happen. So it's very difficult to know who to believe in certain circumstances. But that's why you have the civil courts and the criminal courts. And I know how corrupt they can be as well.
I was really sitting and thinking about it. I'm like, why is it so easy for us to rally behind men who have been abused or used for money, but we don't rally behind women who sit there and be like, I was sexually harassed, or the multiple women that come forward? Maybe it comes down.
Again, she's saying so many things here. And, you know, there's men that get into relationships with men, there's women that get into relationships with women, and these are very huge generalizations. And when you look at different legal systems, like in LA, you know, it's the breadwinner, the one that makes the most money, that usually has to pay out. So you've got cases like Halle Berry and that other girl, I forget her name, off of the TV, and they've got to pay huge amounts of money to their exes because they're the main earner. So it's not necessarily to do with sex, it's more to do with law and which country you reside in and who makes the most amount of money. And so it's not always, and with the family court stuff as well, which is a big complaint from the men's rights community, that's more to do with residency. It's where children are located at the time that the separation occurs. So if they're living with the primary carer of the mother, then the mother has more control than the father. If they're living with the father has more control than the mother. So when it comes to divorce and separation, it has a lot more to do with the legalities of it than it does to do with sex. And this whole thing about feminists versus the men's rights activists or whatever it is, I honestly think that it's a human rights issue, and that the people that suffer the most tend to be children. And I think it's more important to focus on humanity in general and children specifically. Because you can only do so much for one generation. You've got to make sure that it doesn't transcend into the next generation. It's far too easy to set up the sexual dynamic between men and women. Men and women are different because women are designed to have babies and men aren't. And that changes the equality in the way in which they conduct themselves in the world and which society treats them. But again, that's constantly changing as well because of the pill.
To just a sheer lack of understanding for each other, period. I don't think women necessarily realize how easy it is to abuse a man or use him for his money and then just like get away with it and have society all on your side. And I don't think that men realize how easy it is to groom women, sexually abuse them, and then just like pay them off.
Well, women groom men as well, and women groom children. I mean, there's so much abuse by... Again, it's not about sex, it's about the behaviour of the individual, surely. I mean, you know, to base it on sex, I think that's the misnomer. I think that's where people go wrong. You know, you've got to look at human behaviour. If someone's been a dickhead, they've been a dickhead, whether they're a man or a woman, whether they're short or tall, no matter where they come from in the world. And if they're doing something that's illegal, they're doing something that's illegal.
Or still have society on your side. But even that doesn't make the most sense to me, because it's like we have to know what it's like.
You know, when children are sexually abused, it's horrific. And, you know, there's been all sorts of famous organisations that have done that. It's got nothing to do with women at all. And, it, you know, that to me is much more of a heinous crime.
Don't we? We see it happen all the time.
I think you have to define who we is. And the thing is, and this is the problem, is that when you say we, you're referring to more than just one person, and it becomes the group versus the individual. And I think it's more important to focus on what we can do as individuals as opposed to what we can do as a group, if that makes sense. So what can you do as an individual as opposed to what can we do as a group? Because I think that's the main problem, because then once you split up into groups, you've now got tribes, and tribes go to war with each other. Whereas if you look at individual behaviour, and the first place of starting is by looking in the mirror and thinking, how can I improve myself, as opposed to expecting other people to improve themselves. Because it's very easy to give advice, but it's very difficult sometimes to live it out in the world.
Women see all the time men having to pay like $400,000 a month child support in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, and women have to do that as well. That's what I'm saying. Because, and it's not based on sex, it's based on the law and who's making the most money.
Right? We see women come forward all the time about men in Hollywood who have sexually harassed them or sexually abused them or raped them. But it's like...
Yeah, but again, Hollywood is a very unique situation in the same way, you know, to use Las Vegas, you know, as a way of measuring the rest of Western civilization isn't the best tool to use in the same way that Hollywood isn't, because it's been known for many years that there's corruption at the deep levels.
But it's like, for some reason, we will only offer understanding to like our own side. We need to start rallying behind the women who come forward in Hollywood the same way we have behind the men.
Well, no, not necessarily, because I don't think it's based on sex. I think it's based on behaviour. I think that some people are dickheads and some people aren't. And we have to pay attention to those that are trustworthy, not believe the people that are untrustworthy. It really is based on the individual. It's not based on like a group dynamic. You know, because like I say, the moment you go into a group dynamic, then you're at war with each other. I think it's good to appreciate differences, and as opposed to sort of like rally against each other over them.
Johnny Depp, like Terry Crews, like Kevin Gates. But it feels like for women, you can have multiple women come forward about men like R. Kelly, Bill Cosby, Chris Brown. And
those men's careers have suffered as a result.
And then those dudes just have to release a statement that says, oh, this isn't who I am. I would never do this. And we just believe them.
Again, we just believe them. It's who is the we? Like, do you just believe them? Because you can only speak for yourself. The moment you try and speak for a group, that's where you get into murky waters, because you can't speak for other people. You can only speak for yourself.
Here's what we're failing to understand. For men, it is really easy for women to keep male victims quiet, because all they really have to do is just manipulate the social stigma, the gender stigma, that men aren't supposed to be victims, that they're supposed to be tough and strong. So they manipulate that, and those men stay quiet. And what we need to understand about women is that it's really easy to keep women quiet based off of like bribes or the
So women take bribes and men don't. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me.
So here's the thing. When a lot of women are coming forward, it's not fair to be like, oh, they're probably just in it for the money, because guess what? Most women are just paid off. These men will do dirty, abusive things to them and then just pay them to be quiet.
Well, sometimes it's not the men, it's the company. It's got nothing to do with sexual abuse or anything. You just get people that come in and, you know, oh, I slipped on the floor accidentally on purpose at work, and they try and claim compensation. You know, people try and pull scams all the time, and they do so when it comes to these matters as well. So it's important to be very careful about what has happened and what hasn't happened.
And then just pay them to be quiet, because they pick those vulnerable women.
And some women are manipulative and they pick vulnerable men. So again, it's sort of like, I don't think it's so much of a sex thing and that the sexes are treated differently. I think it's more based on individual cases and individuals' behaviours.
I won't always believe the girl if I'm walking down the street and I'm like, oh, that dude's hot, and she's like, yeah, well, he raped me, drinking her Slurpee like nothing ever happened. I won't always really believe her, but I will almost always believe any victim, male or female, who comes forward in Hollywood, especially when there's a bunch of people against a big star, against a big celebrity, because at the end of the day, it's really easy to get away with this shit if you're famous, you're powerful, and you got money. So if we can...
And it's very easy to jump on a bandwagon, and people can get wrongfully accused by one person, and then other people can jump on the claim.
Recognize that, we need to start treating victims better. Thank you very much.
Well, I do agree that we need to treat victims better, and I think that both sides need to be heard, because I think what happens when things go to court a lot of the time is that both parties aren't heard correctly, and depending on which court you go to, some are based on balance of probability and the others are beyond reasonable doubt. So again, it all depends on what you're talking about, and if people are paid off, what were they paid off for? And so I think it's very easy to say we, and to use the collective, and to pit men and women against each other, and to say that we're treated differently. But really, everyone's treated differently. Rich people are treated differently to poor people, men are treated differently to women, older people are treated differently to younger people. But instead of to focus on the differences between people and complain about them, I think it's more important just to look in the mirror and look at yourself and think, how do I conduct myself in the world? What am I doing? Energy flows where attention goes, and I think it's important to focus on where you can best direct your energy in the context of the things that you control over the things that you don't control. So I get what you're saying, but you can't change the world. All you can do is change your own behaviour. And one of the good ways of changing your behaviour that I've found is because you have to judge. So, because you have to have discernment, because something has to be preferable over something else. And it's better to judge it on human behaviour as opposed to a sex or a class of people, or rich or poor. It's better to look at the individual circumstances as opposed to make generalisations.